What's up, everyone? Images and fonts play an outsized role in any well-designed website. Managing and optimizing them can be difficult though, but the performance gain often make that effort worth it. Next.js provides some out-of-the-box features and tools that ensure your images and fonts, especially online fonts, load optimally in all circumstances. In this video, we'll be exploring how each of these features are handled by Next.js and how you can use the tools provided by Next.js to create a beautiful site that performs well. If you want the code that I use for this video, there's a link to the repo in the description. Now, let's dive in. Let's start with images, as these are typically the biggest culprit in any underperforming website. Next.js includes an image component that extends the native image element from HTML. What this component does is it takes your image and optimizes its size while providing a few other options to your image, which we'll cover here shortly. These optimizations can help prevent your page layout from shifting. They can help improve the speed of your site, and they can resize your images for complete flexibility. Here's what a simple image component can look like. So I'm gonna go and create a new file that I will put into my next examples directory, and I'll just call it page.tsx. In our page.tsx, we'll import our image from Next.image, and then we can export a default function called page and return our image with a source. And I'll just use our headshot.jpg that I have. And then an alt, that's just going to be NLV codes. And then finally a width and a height of, we'll just say 200. Now if I save this and we go to our next examples route, we just see a simple image show up here. Source and alt are both required here. As we've talked about before, Next.js treats accessibility as a first-class feature. If you don't set an alt description, you will get warnings that you don't have one set. You can just pass in an empty string if an image is purely decorative. We'll get into this one in more detail later on, but width and height are also required in most circumstances. Now, if your image is a static file like mine is stored in the public directory, we can actually import our headshot from our public directory headshot and replace this with our headshot. And then I can remove our height and width. And when I do that, we can see that the image still shows up just fine, even without the required width and height. The width and height are drawn automatically from the image file by Next.js. We'll go over this in a few moments, but if your image is external, you'll need to provide the width and height if fill is set to false. Typically, CMSs like Payload CMS will include height and width to an image that you upload, so you're able to just use that information from your CMS on your front end. If you don't know the height and width or how to get it, you can just put in some placeholders like 640 by 360, or you can simply set fill to true. Either way, you must set height and width values if fill is not set to true. Now let's get a little bit more specific about external images. External images, or remote images, are images from anywhere outside of your domain. They'll always be accessed with a URL. For example, if you have AWS or some other kind of object storage, the URL returned by them is an external file. And that might look something like this. So we can replace our headshot here with a new source, which is going to be an R2 storage. And then we need to add our width and our height. And when I do that, we can see that we get an error saying that it's not configured under images. And so we can go to our next config, and we just need to add this to our remote patterns. So we go to our images, remote patterns. We're going to pass in our protocol. Then we'll have a host name, which is going to be this host name here. So I'm going to copy that and then paste it here. And then I want it to be any path name. So I can just pass in these two asterisks. And then you do have the option to add a port but you can just leave it as an empty string or just omit it altogether. So when I save this and refresh, we see the image show back up here. You do also have the ability to add search parameters here. So if you did have anything that followed after a question mark in your object storage, you can make sure that you filter based on that as well. You do have the option to include all host names by using the double asterisk in host name, but this is only recommended if you are debugging something. In order to prevent malicious people from accessing your storage or injecting images onto your site, you want to make sure that you set this to be as specific as necessary so that you can serve your images, but no one else can serve their images on your page. Before we go into details about the Next.js image component, check to make sure you're subscribed to my channel and receiving notifications so you never miss when I release more content about Next.js, Payload CMS, Tailwind CSS, and more. If you're tired of trying to stay up to date with all of the news and happenings in web development, consider subscribing to my newsletter to get a bi-weekly overview of everything that's happening in web development. The newsletter is called Next in Dev, and there's a link to that in the description below. Thank you for your support. Now, let's get back to it. Before we talk about fonts, I want to dive deep into the image component and talk about each individual piece that goes into it. First, I do have to say that if you are hosting on Vercel, using the image component is a way that Vercel makes money. So they track each image optimization, and that goes towards your bill if you're on a paid plan. And it is also a limitation on the free plan that will eventually lead to you needing a pro plan. Now, that's not to say you only get that benefit if you use image components with Vercel. Anywhere you can host Next.js, so anywhere like your own VPS, Railway, DigitalOcean, you'll see benefit from the image component on all of those services. It's not a Vercel exclusive. You also don't have to use the image component. The native HTML image element does fine on its own, but you may need to use a third-party service like Cloudinary or some other CDN or caching service in order to help with performance. And all of that is okay to do and is highly recommended. If you do choose to use the image component though, here are a few options that are available to you when you use it. We've already talked about source, height, width, alt, and fill in great detail leading up to this point. Just remember that source and alt are required, and that you'll need to use width and height for any external image unless fill is set to true. Of course, you only need source and alt if you're importing a static image. You can define the sizes of images at breakpoints that you define by setting the sizes prop. You'll want to use this in tandem with your fill prop as well. So I'm going to set fill to true, get rid of width and height, and then we can set our sizes to be max width, 768 pixels, 100 view width, and then 33 view width. So you'll use this if fill is true and if CSS is used to make your image responsive. You can adjust the quality of your image as well by using the quality prop. And this is going to be a number from 1 to 100 that defines the quality of the image. So 1 being very low, you can see how pixelated and grainy this gets, with 100 being the highest quality. Now, if you have an image that's already grainy and pixelated, changing the quality is not going to affect the quality of the image. It'll just make the image bigger, and it'll still be a poor quality image. There are a few props that help with the loading life cycle of an image as well. Loader takes a function that generates a URL, and this allows you to adjust things like width and quality of an image on the fly. And so here's what an image loader would look like, and you can just add it as a loader here as a prop. Now, of course, this is not really going to do anything, but this is how you would create an image loader like this. Loading is an attribute of the native HTML image element, and you can set this to lazy or eager. Images below the fold should be lazy loaded, and anything above the fold should be eagerly loaded. If an image is set to lazy load, a placeholder should be used. So you can use a placeholder, and you can set that to be blur. Now, if you use blur, you need to include a blur data URL. And so I don't have a blur URL, but I can just include data image PNG, just as an example of what this would look like. Most props that use a function will need to be in a client component, so I can change this to be use client to show off these last props. One is our onLoad prop. onLoad will expose your event object where we can just do a console log of our event. And so when we load, we can see in our console when we refresh that we have this event object created from our onLoad prop here. The next option is on error, and we can do the same thing where instead we'll pass in a console error, and then we can see we have an error logged based on the fact that our image currently isn't loading, likely because of all of these other options I've included. And so commenting out those issues does load the image and our error goes away, but I can still see our onLoad object here. Next up, we have priority. And if priority is set to true, loading cannot be lazy. So if an image is priority, it is loaded first. You should only set priority to true if an image is above the fold. Otherwise, it should not be included as a prop. Style is an inherited attribute from the native HTML image element. So we can style this just like we would with any other element using inline styles however we would like to. Lastly, we can use override source if we want to override the image that we have included as a remote image. So instead of our source being from our R2 storage, it's coming from our local host. And now, of course, if we comment this out, we can see now that the local host is still there, but on top of the local host, we see that the URL is actually pointing to our R2 storage. This can come in handy if you're already using the native HTML image element and want to migrate to the image component to prevent an SEO recrawl. Now let's talk about fonts. The font you choose is incredibly important to the look and feel of your website. However, some fonts can be heavy and bog down your site, especially fonts from third parties. And that's where Next.js's font optimization comes into play. Next.js automatically optimizes your fonts and removes external requests. And this can help improve privacy and performance. You also have the option to self-host your own font in Next.js so you don't experience any layout shifts in your project. To get started, I'm going to create a layout.tsx file in our next examples. So I can do new file layout.tsx, and we're going to need a layout. So I'm going to export a default function called layout, and the layout is going to have children, and the children is going to be of type React Node. And then we can just simply return a main element that is going to have a div within it. And the div will have the children prop passed to it. Now here we're going to import React to satisfy our dependency. And now we can see fonts in action. So I'm going to import Roboto from Next Font Google. And then after that's imported, I can set a constant called Roboto, which is going to be set equal to Roboto. And then we can pass in some subsets. So I will include Latin, and then I'll pass in a weight of just 400, which needs to be a string. Then in our main here, we can add a class name that is just going to take our Roboto class name. And then on our page, we need to add some text so we can see what this looks like. So I will remove our image and then pass in a simple div with a paragraph text that says this is some text. And we can see this in the Roboto font. Fonts are scoped to the component they're used in. So if you want the font to apply to your entire project, you'll want to use this in your root layout. But if you want to use this in just a certain subset of your website like this, you are able to include it in any layout.tsx file. To use a local font, I'm going to co-locate my font here to the directory that I want to use it in. And I'm going to import local font from next font local. And instead of Roboto, I'll comment that out. And I'll set a constant called PNT for Proxima Nova Thin. And I'll use a local font to initialize it with a source of, we'll do our Proxima Nova Thin OTF. And we'll include a weight of 400 for good measure. And we'll change our class name here to be PNT. And now when I refresh, we'll see that our text changed to this thin font here. If you want to use multiple files for a local font, you can do that by chaining an array of source objects. So here we'll need our path of the font here, and we can do, just as an example, weight of 100, and then a style of normal. And then if you wanted to, you could do another one with italic, but of course you would need this to then be the italic file for this font family, etc. But I don't have that font, so I will just leave it commented out. And we can explore some more font props here. There are many props you can pass into the font function. We've already covered source, weight, subsets, and style. Some props are specific only to certain fonts, so I'll cover some of the more broad props. For example, preload defaults to true and is used to determine whether a font should be preloaded or not. Fonts that are preloaded can help with the speed of your site. They do this by making sure any page or route that needs the font has it before the first request. By default, fonts are preloaded only based on where they're included. If the font is in your root layout, it's preloaded everywhere. But if you have a font on a single unique page like I do here, it's only preloaded there. Fallback allows you to set an array of fallback fonts. By default, there is no fallback, so you'll need to set it explicitly if you want it. Adjust font fallback defaults to true for Google fonts and Arial for local fonts. Other values for local fonts include Times New Roman as well as false. And what this prop does is it determines whether a fallback font should be used when it can reduce the layout shift on a page. And lastly, variable can be used to set the CSS variable of the font. So for example, I can set the font here of Proxima Nova Thin to be our brand font variable. Next.js makes it easy to manage and optimize images and fonts on your site. Hopefully this video has given you the information you need to not just add and render images and fonts on your site, but to ensure that the experience your users have on your site is an enjoyable one. If you found this video helpful, please like it and share it with others who might also find it useful. Check to make sure you're subscribed to my channel and receiving notifications so you never miss when I release more content about Next.js, Payload CMS, Tailwind CSS, and more. Also, again, consider subscribing to my newsletter to stay up to date with all the news and topics that are happening in modern web development. The link to that is in the description. If you have questions or suggestions, please leave those in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until then, I'll see you on the next one.